So, welcome to Yale College Voices, where we delve into the captivating narratives of individuals shaping the essence of Yale College. And I'm your host, for those of you who don't know me, Darice Corey. And today we have the privilege of unraveling the profound insights and experiences of a distinguished figure within Yale College, Andrew Forsyth. So, welcome today, Andrew.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thank you. Thanks for taking time out of your busy schedule to be with me today. I really appreciate it. So, Andrew, I'm just going to read your bio and then we'll just, have a conversation today. So,
Great. Looking forward to it.
awesome. So, Andrew Forsyth is Associate Dean and Chief of Staff at Yale College. He serves as a senior advisor to the dean, supports the dean in engaging with communities inside and outside the college, and coordinates college-wide strategic planning. Andrew is a college communications liaison, oversees activities and events for the Office of the Dean, and resolves arising issues. Previously at Yale, he worked in what's now the Office of the Secretary and Vice President for University Life, led by Kim Goff-Cruz, where he supported the creation of the university's Belonging at Yale framework, leadership development opportunities for students, collaboration between student life professionals across the university, mental health, wellness, and resiliency programs, and activities to support the free exchange of ideas on campus. He received his Ph.D. from Yale's Department of Religious Studies, having previously studied in his homeland of Scotland and at Harvard and Cambridge universities. His book, Common Law and Natural Law in America, From the Puritans to the Legal Realists, was a joint winner of Heidelberg University's Manfred Lautenschlager Award. He occasionally teaches at Yale College. His courses include Tradition and Modernity, the Ethics of Forgiveness, and Law, Morality, and Religion. Beyond Yale, Andrew is a gubernatorial appointee on the board of Connecticut Humanities, the state affiliate of the National Endowment for the Humanities, which connects people to the humanities through grants, partnerships, and collaborative programs. He is also president of the Elm Shakespeare Company, which brings people together through Shakespeare, with thousands of young people participating each year in programs. Tens of thousands of New Haven and beyond enjoy these free performances in New Haven's Edgerton Park. As a side note to our listeners, in early 2023, I co-authored a proposal with David Caruso requesting funds to support the kickoff of the podcast. So the Belonging at Yale initiative granted $2,000 to support Yale College's unit plan implementation for the Yale College Voices project. So, Andrew, I want to thank you for your contributions to creating the university's Belonging at Yale framework, because otherwise this podcast might not even exist. So thank you. And again, welcome today.
Thank you.
So it's awesome to just have an opportunity to get to know you more. And I think years ago, we sort of worked together on a committee for, I want to say it was during Org Sync days. Quite a long time ago, yes. Right? And
so that's our engagement platform for particularly for student organizations, but
yes,
went through various iterations,
right?
And we've been refining it,
right? And which is now sort of evolved into campus groups and but yeah, we collaborated, but I've never had an opportunity to really just get to know you, so I'm just really appreciative of having this time with you today. And I'm wondering if you could, we'll start off by, if you could share a little bit more about your time growing up in Scotland.
Sure. Yep. So I'm from Glasgow in Scotland. People from Glasgow are called Glaswegians.
Okay.
And you say the S in it, you say is kind of a Z sound if you're from Glasgow. So Glasgow rather than Glasgow.
Okay.
Although people from the Highlands of Scotland say Glasgow, but people from Glasgow say Glasgow.
Okay.
So it's it's a big city. It's if you count the people outside of the formal city limits, but clearly part of the urban area, it's probably 1.5 million people. So it's a large city, largest in Scotland. It's a city that has a very strong sense of itself, has a long history, although it really became a major place in the 19th century with heavy industry, shipbuilding, heavy engineering, I think like locomotive trains, at one point half of the world's trains came from Glasgow, or their engines did at least. So one of
Interesting.
these places that was a kind of a powerhouse in the 19th century, struggled a bit in the 20th century, has kind of reinvented itself as a post-industrial city in some ways. So really concentrating on arts and culture and education.
Wow.
I'm always trying to think of a US equivalent. Kind of Pittsburgh comes to mind in some ways. So, again, a place with a strong sense of self that built a lot of things that now is kind of post-building and has really tried to lean on their culture and education as hopefully not just filling that gap, but being a part of a new identity. So it was a good place to grow up. I grew up in the city itself I suppose it would be the kind of Victorian ring. There was commuter rail that connected up those parts of the city to the center, and so just about a 10-minute train journey or bus journey into the center of city center.
Interesting. And like, what inspired your academic journey? Like as you were growing up there.
Yeah, it's a difficult question, actually. I was trying to, in advance of this, I was trying to give some thought to it. And I think in some ways I was quite a lazy student in kind of primary and secondary school.
Oh, wow.
So that's the elementary school and high school.
Yeah.
I think I had some natural talent, but I don't think I pushed myself hugely. And my parents are certainly very supportive of studying, and I enjoyed school to the most part. They always gave the impression that it would be natural for me to go to college, and so I kind of grew up in a household that valued learning. It kind of seems quaint with all the information we have in our fingertips now, but my dad growing up would often we'd big old sets of encyclopedias,
Really?
and if someone would mention a topic and he didn't know the answer to it, he would go for one of those reference books and be like, let's look that up. And almost to a comic extent, it's kind of teased him about it slightly. But also it meant that, it was a place where, both my parents were kind of curious, interested, wanted to know more. Yeah. And so I suppose the educational journey probably came from that. I should also say both my parents are teachers. So my mum taught in primary school, so elementary school, and my dad in high school, but PE. Really? So maybe not the most not the most academic of subjects, but as a human being, he was someone who really valued learning new things of all kinds. So I suppose if I inherited anything or grew up with a pattern of what that might look like, it was because of that.
Oh, that's amazing. And it's funny when you mentioned the encyclopedias, like I grew up during a time when we had the giant sets of encyclopedias. And what's interesting about that, I wonder, just mentioning encyclopedias, if students today would have any clue what we're referring to. Like you literally had to figure out the topic and dig through the book to figure out.
There's interesting sorting skills doing that. I've read some studies, so I think the Purvu Center has talked about this a bit as well, the Teaching and Learning Center, about what's lost if students aren't going into the stacks and picking up books. And because books on similar subjects will be located nearby. And so I certainly had the experience of libraries growing up and in college and things, of going looking for a particular book, and then you happen to glance your eyes over the shelf and you saw something, there's something that's related, but not something that you'd have grasped. And so in a way, I think encyclopedias had that as as you'd be looking up a subject and then you'd happen to see some other topic.
Exactly.
And you would look at it. So
I've
got a newfound appreciation
of
it.
Yeah, it's really interesting. It brings back memories of just the finding a book, and going through all the stacks and looking through the, growing up, I had to go through the card catalogs, So I was curious, like, in terms of your upbringing, it sounds like it definitely influenced your perspective on education and scholarship. And I'm just wondering how that carried over into, your professional pursuits. So if you could tell us a little more about that.
Yeah, I've never been particularly planned out. I've kind of taken advantage of opportunities that have arisen and hopefully been in good situations that allow a next step. So I never had a great plan. After high school, I went to the University of Glasgow, so one of the universities in Glasgow, and originally a medieval foundation, so 15th century, long history. Although, again, most of the buildings are actually from the 19th century, when you had this big expansion in Glasgow. And that was very much the done thing. You know, if you were a smart person in the west coast of Scotland, you went to your local university. And so I mostly commuted. There was one year where I stayed on campus, but most of the time I was going in from my part of the city to where the university was. And, you know, I just explored subjects that I was interested in. Again, without any great forward direction about what that might mean. Scottish universities are, as many other universities in the English-speaking world outside of the US, tend to be more focused early on. And so it's not quite the liberal arts education that our students in Yale College get. It was more, you had a shorter list of subjects that you were exploring. So you had to make choices as a 16-year-old, 17-year-old, 18-year-old about kind of what general direction you were going in. And I kind of fell into the humanities, kind of broadly humanistic, like social science direction, and just happened to pick up subjects that I enjoyed and explored. And I suppose through college, I realized that maybe I had more of an interest than other students, or more of an academic interest. You know, plenty of smart people who are not academically inclined, you know, they have other pursuits. And also I think I probably learned some of the habits, maybe developed some self-discipline, probably just grew up in many ways in order to overcome some of that maybe natural laziness that I was talking about
Exactly.
in my elementary and high school days. So I think I became more of the person I am today during that period, just in terms of building habits and kind of good practices and really honing in on what I was interested in.
Interesting. So I'm curious, you know, if when you think of teaching courses here at Yale College and interacting with students, and do you see sort of parts of yourself in students that you teach, and or how do you how do you mentor students when or do you see things that you experienced back then that you'd like to help students along?
Right. It's a good question. So I presume and I expect that our students get a variety of perspectives and approaches, and so I don't try to overthink my teaching. You know, I try and be organized and careful, and I have a particular way that I teach, and I'm very comfortable, I think, with thinking that there'll be plural approaches. There'll be people who teach in very different ways that will be very successful. I tend to teach in a seminar setting, and so what I'm really interested in is everyone contributing. That can be difficult because there'll be people who are more naturally, by nature or by experience, will be better positioned to contribute verbally. So I try and mix in a variety of different approaches. So I will ask a question and then say, let's spend 2 minutes for you to come up with that answer. So some people will write it down, others will just look into space, but give that pause, because often you're waiting for contributions that would have come if you'd just given people a bit of space to do it. Or I'm looking up we have a board in the studio just now. I often do board work. So I'll begin writing something and I'll make some kind of schematic about it that if I look back at it afterwards would be terrible, I'm sure, but in the moment feels as if it's worthwhile, where you're charting connections between different points. I do sometimes do what gets called kind of Socratic style or semi-Socratic. So I ask an open-ended question and then we'll call on people to answer. And so there's research goes back and forward about how helpful that is to people.
The pressure.
So I try and minimize the pressure by going around the room. So I expect in an average seminar session, I expect everyone to speak. I want everyone to speak multiple times. That's the goal. And so sometimes if it's something that's factual, if it's something that they should know just by doing the reading, I will go around the room and say, Richard, give me the answer to this question. Alice, give me the answer to this question. Jennifer, give me the answer to this question. And go around the room so that people, which probably does still make people nervous because they know they're coming up.
Right.
But on the other hand, means that everyone hears their own voice in the room and everyone expects that they're going to talk multiple times. And so they don't just go into their default of, I'm a person who talks a lot in a class or I'm a person who doesn't talk a lot in the class. So I'm always experimenting with it. I think different students get different things from it. Maybe this is a self-justification, but I've told myself that those people for whom this is more difficult is still a useful skill to learn.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it might be uncomfortable, but it might be a worthwhile type of discomfort to know that there are situations in life where you might just be called upon to say something.
Where it's sort of like you have to practice at some point, right? Even if you're shy, like you said, it's good to at least feel like you have a voice, because then there are times where if you're introverted, you may never participate if you don't have that opportunity. So I was curious what drew you to pursue your PhD, sort of taking a turn here.
Yeah, it's a good question. So my PhD is from Yale's Religious Studies department, and I suppose I can take the steps back. So in college, one of the areas where I ended up studying was the study of religion, and for a variety of different reasons, but I think probably the combination of ethical interests, so thinking that here are ideas that motivate people to act in particular ways and to have a sense of the purpose of their life and their relationships, tied with history. So it's that connection, I think, between being able to chart a history, see change over time, see how very contingent things end up being very important, or seemingly important things disappear, and to tie that to this, as I said, this sense of ethical or moral weight. So I got interested in that in college. I ended up getting a fellowship to study in the US, and so did a 2-year degree at Harvard in their divinity school, which is like Yale's divinity school in many ways, although even more kind of pluralistic and involves a number of has faculty and students of many religious traditions and none. And so that was a great place to be. I actually was there thinking that I was just kind of scratching an itch of knowledge, and that I was going to go off and do something more vocational.
Really?
And so ended up back in the UK, and but found that I still had that itch, and so I wanted to pursue more scholarship. And I knew of certain faculty at Yale, and also very straightforwardly at Harvard, I'd met my now husband.
Oh, that's great.
And so there was some negotiation about where would we end up if we were going to not be in a long distance relationship, but hopefully a long-term relationship. And so it ended up being that my best offers, as it were, ended up being from Yale and from Chicago. And Josh is my husband, and he had been a Yale undergrad. He's actually from Connecticut and had gone to Yale and had lived in Chicago. And so slightly by chance, slightly by design, the options ended up being places that he would be happy to live. And Yale was my slightly preferred option, and he ended up being very happy coming back to New Haven as an adult who'd been away for I think
years.
10 years by that point. So it was nice for
that's
nice
great.
to have
And
that
it all
return.
came together, right?
It did.
That's great.
So that's again part of this, both like mixture of the planned and the unplanned. Trying to be thoughtful about next steps, but there were all sorts of contingent things which fell into place to mean that I ended up at Yale.
Oh, that's so neat. Thank you for sharing that. And so I'm curious, comparing your experiences studying abroad to coming to Yale, like how did that did it change like your personal development or affect how you approach teaching later on? Or
I think I think we're very proud of our liberal arts education at Yale and in many US institutions, and it's something that I've come very much to value. I do think in Britain you were made quite early on to make certain decisions, and I suppose without over psychoanalyzing myself, I suppose I through my education, I managed to delay decisions to explore new areas and new interests. And so I value that in the liberal arts, not that we want our students to be delaying decisions, but that we want them to have some room to explore and find out new things. And so I've really come to embrace that and to understand the purpose of bringing together students with so much potential so that they can explore issues together, and with teachers, with faculty, with staff, and hopefully be changed in the experience. So I'm a big believer, I suppose, in the change that education can bring.
Yes.
Not that we lose our histories beforehand, but that we get to maybe take a bit of a step back from them, see ourselves, pursue interests that we never knew that we had.
Yes.
And that so a place like Yale is wonderful in just exposing people both to the range of knowledge, but just to the amazing range of people that perhaps they would never have experienced before they were here.
Exactly.
So I suppose in myself, I've learned to really appreciate that aspect of U.S. higher education.
Right.
Although it means it's very expensive. I mean, I always reflect on how privileged I am to both have had a Ph.D. at Yale, which received unbelievable levels of financial and other support, and now to work at Yale. That it's not a model that can work everywhere, just because it's so resource intensive, and that's part of the wonder of it. But also, it makes it. I think we have to know that and think how to make the best societal use of all that investment that we're putting into people.
Yeah, that's amazing. And even, working here at Yale, when you mentioned experiencing or meeting people that you probably never would have interacted with or been able to work with before. And I think that's probably one of my favorite things about being here. Is just, I anywhere else I wouldn't have met someone like you, you know what I mean? And it's a wonderful experience to be able to, even just doing this podcast and talking to different people who are part of our staff, and from so many different backgrounds, and where they grew up, and educational pursuits, and all of these different things that I never would have had an opportunity to come across.
And I'm always struck by, people at you, Darice, who are in roles that exist in other types of institution or in industry, but have chosen to be at Yale. So whether it's IT, or I think of this with our lawyers in the Office of General Counsel, that there's often something very interesting about them, because you and they have made a choice that this is the type of place that you want to bring your skills and energy to.
Right. Yeah.
When there are, there's many different contexts that you could be doing your work.
So world and all that kind of stuff.
So even within, even within, and I think particularly beyond the obvious work directly with students or in kind of academic affairs, I think you find the staff at Yale tend to be very interesting because they've made those choices.
Yeah, absolutely. Because I think, I've years ago I worked in more of a corporate environment, and then I sort of a couple times I flip-flopped between corporate and nonprofit, and I just found nonprofit work to be more rewarding. Just that feeling of contributing to an overarching mission, and really seeing what my work, how that feeds into that mission. I think in a corporate environment, it's different, it's just very different, and the goals are different, where, I have always just enjoyed working in nonprofit, and also, the educational, or higher ed, industry. And it's something that, at least for me, it's, at the end of the day, I could see where what my work contributes to, and that I think that's been the driving force all these years. And plus Yale is a great place to work. So, but I'm wondering if you could, we'll take a kind of another turn. I mentioned earlier that you authored a book, Common Law and Natural Law in America. And I was curious, what was the inspiration behind the book?
Yeah, so it's based on my PhD, so it's partly the fruits of my interests, and I ended up, as I mentioned earlier, kind of interested both in straightforwardly religious sources, but also legal and moral sources. And one way to see that in action is to look at, on the field or in case studies, how those related over time in particular places. And so common law is just the term that we use for law that gets built up through cases. So there's a broader sense that all law in most of the English-speaking world is common law, but there's also a narrower sense that it's different from statutory law, let's say, that, or the Constitution. It's the kind of bread and butter criminal tort things that states deal with where they're trying to make decisions. And so you have law that builds up, that kind of accretes over time, and the history is important. It's built in precedent. Alongside that, natural law is this term. It's kind of a controversial term. It means different things in different moments. But you have the sense of there being universal value when, the Declaration talks about intrinsic rights, or in the 20th century, you get the rise of kind of human rights discourse. Then that's part of this broad sense that law should have something to do with morality, that law is not just what we say it is, but it has some kind of, for law truly to exist, it needs to be connected to value. And so the book really just traces how these two things have been either held together or rejected over time. It's slightly transatlantic, but it ended up, like me, I suppose, mostly ending up in the United States.
Really? That's awesome.
And so it's fun because it goes from kind of colonial beginnings and all of the complexity there into the through the 18th century, into the 19th century, into the early 20th century. I kind of stopped before kind of at this low point for the natural law regime. And then actually after the Second World War, you have a bit of a return to interest, particularly with, as I said, the rise of kind of discussion around human rights and universals. So it was a fun project to do. I was glad that I was able to take what had been written for a particular purpose, for a PhD, and turn it into something a bit more, bit more readable, a bit more narrative. I worked with a very good editor to create the book, so that was a nice project to finish up as I was kind of transitioning from being educated at Yale to being a staff member at Yale.
Yeah, that's awesome. And what was it like to receive the recognition?
Yes, this award from Heidelberg.
Award,
so it was lovely. And unfortunately, the nice thing about that award is that they bring you to Germany.
Oh wow!
And Heidelberg is this famous university town. It's the student prince. There's an operetta and things like that.
Really?
There's this famous. It's this famous. Kind of symbol of a certain type of like German-speaking education. So it's a famed university, and they had this whole trip planned out, and then COVID hit.
Oh, okay.
And so I didn't actually get to go over and
no.
participate. And
Really?
I thought years afterwards they would bring back the people who won the prize in my particular year, but it didn't happen.
Happen.
I just had to
that's
submit.
too
I think.
bad.
I had to submit a little essay and photograph rather than going over to participate in the activities. So very nice to be, always nice to be recognized.
Yes, absolutely.
And, I think particularly if you're in the academic world, but I'm sure it's true in different other, fields of inquiry and work, there's sometimes a very narrow set of information you're working with, or a narrow group of people who are your immediate audience. Right. So anything that brings slightly broader recognition, anything that forces you to talk in slightly broader terms, I always welcome at least.
Yeah, that's amazing. And how do you pull that into like your current role, like just in terms of balancing all of that, your academic pursuits along with your role as associate dean and chief of staff at Yale College? Like how do you balance those things?
I mean, I'd say honestly, I'm purely in administration these days. So I enjoy teaching when I have the opportunity to do it, and I try and keep up some reading in my world, but I'm not a productive scholar.
Okay.
Maybe at some point there'll be a shift that allows me to focus there more. I will say I've enjoyed, and it's been slightly unexpected, how much time I get to spend on topics that I have an academic interest in. And I suppose that's the background in, as I said, kind of ethics, or one of my interests, and this connects to the law to a certain extent, is in how institutions work, how fair institutions work, and the purposes of education and the practices that we build to support flourishing communities.
Right.
And, at different levels of abstraction or specification, that comes up in my work almost every day.
Really?
And so I feel like even though it's not a clear academic use of that background work, I think something of my thinking has been formed by just thinking about what does a good institution look like? What are the practices that we want to put in place in order for people to flourish and have a sense of community? And so that's been a nice surprise in a way that my spouse sometimes reminds me of that. He says, he'll say to you, I'll be talking over something at the end of the day, and he'll make the connection saying, wasn't that a topic that you were interested in 5 years ago when you were thinking about it through an academic lens, and now you're trying to put that in practice in terms of just a very problem-solving type thing that comes up in Yale College all the time. So it has been a transition. I've enjoyed it. I think I've been well suited to it. Some people are, some people aren't, I think. But it's been nice to be able to carry over some of those at least broad interests or questions into the role as well.
Oh, that's awesome. And so I'm curious, if you don't mind sharing, what are some of the, I mentioned your position as Associate Dean and Chief of Staff. If you don't mind sharing, some of the maybe even challenges that you've faced over the years in your role.
So I'm fairly new in this role. So I started around the same time as Dean Pericles Lewis started. So I would say, my first year, I'm in my second year now, my first year was really just learning a lot from those around me. And we have, in the college, we have staff who have deep experience, some in positions or similar positions over decades, multiple decades.
Right.
And so just, trying to really make the most of kind of soaking in their knowledge and expertise was the beginning. I think change is, I enjoy change in many ways, but change can be difficult. And I was both conscious of how I was experiencing change, and also because mine was a new position, I was very conscious about how did my position potentially change others' positions or their perception of their role. And so, I think I tried to be sensitive to that and recognize that I might be a disruptive force. Even as I also was feeling the sense of this is I'm in a moment of change and need to really learn from other people. So that was, that I find that valuable. I hope I probably now have a better sense of the ways that I can act in the role to support people so that they're not fearing my involvement. I suppose my philosophy of the job has always been that I am trying to provide additional capacity to people. So I have some projects that I'm fully responsible for, but a lot of the times I'm involved is just to be an extra pair of hands or to take something off someone's plate or an issue arises and it doesn't really fall into someone else's area. And so I kind of end up being the person who can step up and do it. So that's a real privilege because it means I get to see across the college. But as I said, I also try and make sure that I'm not stepping on people's toes or I sometimes say, if I step on someone's toes, I hope I'm doing it deliberately.
Right.
Sometimes you need to step on people's toes.
Right.
I don't want to inadvertently step on someone's toes. So
got it. So yeah, and I mean, that had to be a challenge. Like you said, change is difficult for some. What were some of the things that you sort of pulled from your education that kind of helped you along in that process?
Well, I suppose from education, a certain ability to detach from the issue at hand, to be able to take a step back, to analyze it. I'm quite an analytic person. My brain works sometimes by dividing things up into
Yeah.
little chunks. And I always have to make sure that I don't take that too far and that I'm talk to people who are the opposite and who want to bring together everything. And I think that's a nice dynamic to have with colleagues. And I can see that in them, and hopefully they see in me the ability to line out or determine specific things. So being able to take a view on a subject with a certain level of detachment, while I still hope a sensitivity to the people involved, I think has been useful. My job before my current one, as you mentioned, was in what's now called the Office of the Secretary and Vice President for University Life. And Kim Goff-Cruz is the University Secretary and Vice President. And I learned a lot from observing her. And she and I, to a much lesser extent, were often in the receiving end of people being upset by issues, certain grievances coming up. And, I think just by seeing how she handled that situation, I could tell that even though things could be hurtful, she didn't take them personally. If you're in a position of leadership, then sometimes you are just the end stop of people's legitimate or illegitimate grievances. And so I suppose I should try this more in my personal life, but at least in my work life, I think I've got a good sense of sometimes people are angry about things and it's not because of me, and that I can recognize that and again try and be helpful to them, even if they are not engaging with me in the way that I might necessarily wish
prefer,
that they did. So I suppose that's all. Both of those examples really are about, can you take a breath? Can you take a step back? Can you look at a subject and imagine yourself either in the shoes of someone else and why they might be frustrated or angry, or to put an issue pose it in a different way that brings some clarity so that there can be conversation and decision.
Yeah. And I'm glad you brought up that point, because and we all kind of go through that same situation where you have to take a step back or not react immediately, right? And imagine yourself in the other person's shoes, but also you don't necessarily know where the emotion or whatever's coming across is coming from. Like it may not even have to do with you, but whatever other situation is going on, in that person's life, or personal life or professional life. And I'm curious, like you mentioned trying to do that, but that must have been difficult, like you said, working in with Kim Goff-Cruz. And when you hear, I'm assuming you hear like a lot of complaints, or you sort of get the negative side more than the positive. So how did you work through that? Like, did it become exhausting, or was it?
I think there was a balance of work, and there were some very exciting collaborative projects where you were bringing together people who were energized around a topic. Awesome. And so I suppose one strategy, if it was a strategy, was just to balance, be able to balance days and weeks and months with the types of work that you could do, so that you were both responding to real need and perhaps things that could be experienced as negative, but you were also having these opportunities to create new things. And that was one of the fun things about that office was Yale has, it's kind of an odd role in some ways, and Yale over in the 20th century at least has used that kind of secretary role often as a place to give special projects to, or to hold together work that needs to happen across the university but is not owned by one part of the university. And so it meant that, again, you saw a wide breadth of people and interests, and the divinity school is not the medical school, and undergrads have different expectations than graduate students. And so I find that energizing. It could have perhaps been overwhelming, but it was nice seeing you saw the kind of pluralism of Yale in action, just even in that context through a particular, every topic, there would be 10 different opinions and 10 different sets of interests in it. And another nice thing about it just was that we were a small team, so it kind of had the sense of something of a startup culture or kind of entrepreneurial culture that but we didn't have clearly defined. We were always trying to define our job roles, but they were always overlapping. There were always multiple people involved. And so once I got to know my team there, and we grew and changed while I was there. But that was nice because it was just our usual habit and pattern to be responding to new things and working out who should be involved in the conversations, and knowing that you could rely on people in that team. So I gained a lot from that.
Oh, that's awesome. And how did that carry over into your current role?
Yeah, I mean, I hopefully have taken with that the idea that collaboration can be wonderful, and that also needs, kind of guardrails around clarity. And I think if you were painting or drawing up in that board I was talking about earlier, things that are in productive tension, then I think at Yale we are a place that's highly consultative and collaborative, and that sometimes that means that there can be frustrations around who makes a decision, when does a decision get made, and hopefully in what I do, and hopefully as a partner and team member, I can help others make those in a productive tension, so that we are listening carefully to each other while also deciding when a suitable timeline and a suitable decision maker for those issues. So I think I brought that sense with me. Also, on a very personal level, the secretary's office, very few people or offices directly report to that office. So it meant that the power of that office and of Kim Goff Cruz is a kind of convening power. So it's pulling people together, it's helping them see commonality, it's maybe providing some additional resources or capacity, rather than being able to tell people what to do. Right. And in my current role, as I said, a lot of what I do is kind of help with certain issues or step in, mostly with people who do not have any kind of reporting relationship to me. So it's again a similar mindset. It's how do you motivate people to identify together and pursue goals, and for me to be useful to genuinely useful to people, rather than be a hindrance, rather than be getting in the way or stepping on toes when I don't mean to.
That as you were talking, or as you're speaking, it reminded me of as you know, I went through the Emerge program, and one of the topics that came up, in terms of key characteristics of a great leader is not necessarily telling people what to do, but helping remove obstacles so that people can do what they, do their jobs or do what they need to do. So that's awesome. I'm taking another turn because I was really surprised at your involvement with the Elm Shakespeare Company and also the Connecticut Humanities. And so I wanted to ask about, what motivated you? Was it an interest in Shakespeare that motivated you to become involved with the Elm Shakespeare Company?
A very amateur interest. Really, I got involved because my colleague in the secretary's office, Heather Calabrese, who many people will know on campus, and who runs a lot of the university traditions, and including commencement. I spoke with her maybe a year into my job in the secretary's office, and I said, I now feel sufficiently established in New Haven as a non-student that I want to get more involved with local not-for-profits. And Heather, before she was at the university, had been very much involved with United Way, I think, as staff person at United Way. I think she's now involved on the kind of board side and the Yale campaign side. But she had been a staff member, CEO type, and so has a very good knowledge of the not-for-profit landscape in New Haven. And so I just, I remember we'd lunch, and she kind of talked over areas where she thought I might be able to contribute and where my interests lined up. And one of those ended up being Elm Shakespeare. And so I got involved in the board, and they've kept me there, and I'm now serving as an officer. And so that's been fascinating because we've really grown as a company, even in the time that I've been involved. It initially was really solely providing a free park performance. There always had been education, but it had been around that performance. And now there are, I think, over there are 1,000 students in kind of Greater New Haven who are involved through school partnerships, residencies, camps. And so there's a huge educational effort, as well as the kind of flagship performance, which many people see. And I think in our big years, we get about 30,000 people from New Haven and beyond who come to the part performance.
Oh my gosh.
It's a way for me to be involved in the life of the city, as well as, there are some university connections, as there are going to be in a... New Haven is a college town in some ways.
Yes,
I mean, it has multiple universities, and but it also is a nice way for me to get to know folks and to be involved in the life of the city.
Oh, that's amazing. So my next question was going to be, a memorable experience with the Yale Shakespeare Company. But I mean, I can only imagine the, like you said, 30,000. And I've been to Edgerton Park.
Yep.
So I'm trying to visualize what that
not
must
in one
be
night,
like.
not in one night. So
over
that's
time?
over the
Okay.
over the 20 nights or whatever that happened.
Oh, that's so neat.
But it
though.
is great. Yeah, I know that's great, and
it's a beautiful park.
It's a beautiful
like
park.
A location. Yeah,
and it's nice for people to gather there, and they bring their their rugs to put in the ground, or your foldable beach chairs or whatever to come, and often people will bring some kind of picnic and watch a performance, and if the weather cooperates, it can be a magical summer experience.
Absolutely. Oh, that's amazing. Are there do you pick or do they pick like a specific Shakespeare play to so
it differs every year. I think we're yet to make our announcement for this year, so I will hold off.
Okay. I was about to ask.
We've had a series of, let me hint at something, we've had a series of the kind of lighter comedies.
Okay.
And I think there's going to be a big turn towards the dramatic and tragic. So that will be an interesting move.
What was last year's, for example? Or do you remember?
Yeah, it was Merry Wives of Windsor.
Merry Wives of... I don't think I've read that one.
Which is slightly less well known, so it was kind of a fun one to do. But often I think the ones that you get most people for are like Midsummer Night's Dream, and
yes,
we've had Twelfth Night, and really ones
amazing.
that people enjoy and that work in the environment.
Right. I love organizations like that because, when I was in high school, that was one of my favorite parts of the classes I had to take was Shakespeare, and I always enjoyed interpretation.
Yep.
Of the language and the plays and the scenes and things like that. But it's awesome that the organization feeds that curiosity for students, because if you've never been introduced to it, it may be difficult to understand, or for those who just never had access, or someone to get them excited about it, and so that must be really rewarding.
Yeah, no, and I really credit the staff members who are doing the education work. That they're very sophisticated pedagogies of how to involve students, and it's not. There's no desire to present Shakespeare in a particular way. It's to give people voice. It's to have people lean into self-expression and knowledge of themselves and knowledge of others through use of these kind of classic texts.
That's awesome.
So in one sense, I like Shakespeare, I enjoy Shakespeare, but you could substitute another canonical set of writing to do something similar with. I think because Shakespeare continues to play a role in our high school curriculums and other things, then it's a great way to give energy and excitement, and to open up a world that perhaps students are getting in the classroom, but they get to see differently if they're actually made to animate the words and see themselves in it.
That's amazing. Because that was actually going to be my next question, is just how it contributes to building community and inclusivity among students. And like you said, how do you see arts in terms of sort of building that inclusion and making students feel like it's another way to express themselves and get involved?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think you put your finger on it, that one of the primary ways is by giving people a framework to channel energy and self-expression. I think it also is an opportunity to experience things that you wouldn't otherwise experience. So I think I mentioned kind of constructive tensions earlier. I suppose a constructive tension is always between wanting to represent and include, and also in constructive tension, how to challenge and expose difference.
Yeah.
And so you want both of those things. You want students to be exploring worlds that they've not explored before,
Right.
but also meeting themselves in new ways and understanding the folks around them in new ways because of that connection. So that, to me, that's the ideal. And I suppose that's my educational ideal as well, that we see and experience things that are completely outside of our knowledge, but somehow in doing so, we can reflect on ourselves and be strengthened in that, even as there's also moments where we want to see kind of full representation and inclusion.
Yeah.
As a child, I was you have me thinking about childhood and encyclopedias and things that I was fascinated by ancient Egypt.
Oh, interesting.
And, my mother tells stories of my, her mother, my grandma, like reading out, as a 5-year-old reading out texts to me that were full of very obscure terminology and her, my grandma looking at my mother and saying, like, why is he reading this stuff, or having this stuff read to him? Yeah. But I think that was part of my interest is in worlds that I've not explored or mindsets that I've not known. And that, again, whether through Shakespeare or through education, whether through performance or reading, then that can be a way to experience worlds that are not our own worlds. And hopefully, as I said, we're opened and broadened by that pursuit.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that, because I was even thinking back to when you said your husband mentioned how he connected the dots for you and the actual work that you did early on, and now that you're acting it out now, you're putting it to use to contribute to this.
I'm not very good actually at recollecting the past. I've always been quite a forward-facing person. It's always been like, what's next?
Really?
Maybe as I get older, I'll be more looking backwards. But even in anticipation of this conversation, I was slightly nervous, thinking, will I be able to remember any of having heard previous shows? I know you ask about childhood and things. Will I be able to remember any fun examples?
Right.
But no, it is nice. It's nice to be able to trace the narrative and kind of see the through lines and see the moments where I've certainly grown into certain things or made decisions to, I think part of growing up obviously is deciding to go left or right, and you can think about that in different ways. But it's fun to think about why I made choices at particular times, and would I make the same one?
Yeah, absolutely. And even you sharing, looking at ancient Egypt books. I mean, it shows that early on you had that curiosity.
I think lots of children. I mean, Egypt seems to have people seem to love it. Dinosaurs, I always think about.
Dinosaurs.
Why is that the case? I think there must be some hardwiring into children's imaginations about things that they don't see in front of them. They want to see about things that they can connect to, but that are not the things that you if you looked at your apartment window you
wouldn't see. No, that's amazing. And so even you already shared different ways that you've contributed to fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion in your various roles at Yale and even outside of Yale. So I'm curious, we're kind of almost wrapping up our time together, but looking back on your journey, is there any advice that you would give your younger self?
Good question. I think my west coast of Scotland, kind of Glasgow background was fairly traditional and small c conservative in that there were lots of kind of set expectations about how people act in the world.
Right.
And I pushed at some of those and, was, being gay, that was different. And high school was an experience and we could have talked about that. But imagine, that I think was probably now a very different experience and I'd be fascinated to, I should check in with children of friends and things like that and see what their experience has been like and how that differs from mine. But so I think I was always slightly tentative and careful and there were, and I suppose if I went back, I would say, you can, what's the worst that can happen if you be less risk averse.
Really? Okay.
And I suppose I see that I think I've got better at that and I more readily take risks or I'm more reasonable about understanding what the downside of a risk would be.
Okay.
And I think that's a lot of what we need to think about as a college and the staff members, that it's like, we obviously want to be careful and we're stewarding resources and we don't want reputational damage, but there's also things where we can just try things out and see if they work or don't work. And that, I think, helping build a culture where maybe we're a bit more willing to do that is something that I would tell myself as well.
Yes.
Certainly in the past and in this moment, I try and have that in mind as well. So
that's awesome.
Responsible risk-taking, I suppose that's called.
Responsible risk-taking. That's awesome. We didn't get a chance to touch on your high school years, but I'm curious, maybe even, again, thinking back, were there certain lessons, looking back at yourself during high school years that, lessons that you learned later on that you wish you could have shared, in addition to responsible risk-taking.
Right.
But were there any other lessons that you would have told your high school version of yourself?
I think I learned over time that I've always had a certain comfort with pluralism, and so I debated in college, for example, in this. Maybe I was attracted to that because of this, so that there could be multiple reasonable presentations that differ from each other. And so I think I've always had that comfort, whether that's been instinctive or developed. But I think I was overly quick to take the next step, the wrong next step, in attributing, kind of intention to that other view. And as I've got older and experienced more of the world, I've got more of a sense of humility in not ascribing motivation. Okay. So I now try and take everything I experience with as much good faith as possible.
Right.
So I think, as I said, I think I've always been reasonably good at understanding that there can be difference, but in the past, I wanted to explain that difference. Right. Whereas now I allow for this, boundary of mystery or humility or however you want to think about it. So
or even
that,
dialogue, right? Like you said.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need to hear the other. You want the other to explain rather than to presume. So I suppose it's be less presumptuous, I suppose, is the short way of that point.
Yeah. So how do you see your work in your current role just sort of contributing to some of our broader conversations? And you talked about how you're hoping to help remove obstacles versus becoming an obstacle. Right. But how do you see your work contributing to broader conversations when it comes to ethics or law or even just community engagement amongst staff?
I'll take a very simple one. So we've started orientation for new staff members in Yale College. Awesome. And so in the fall, we had a pilot program and gathered together people actually from the last year. So it was kind of a large group of people, maybe 20 or so people who had started in the college, either entirely new to the college or people who had worked in other parts of the university and come back to Yale College. And just to introduce them to who we are in this moment and the mission and our values, and also just in very practical ways, the face-to-face time with senior leaders, with Pericles Lewis and others. And so that's been that feels like a very practical way of just saying we are working together. We all contribute. We can identify a direction that we're heading. And that we can enjoy each other and learn from each other by being together. Oh, that's awesome. And so that, I think, as I've been involved in kind of the university's belonging work, obviously there are kind of clear-cut things that we need to do in terms of just fairness or even justice in a more abstract sense. And then there are often just our regular practices that we want to make helpful and inclusive and that represent the broad perspectives and experiences that we have in our staff. And so a very simple thing like having it's now a 4-part series, this orientation program, a 4-part series where we're giving time to people to come together, we're feeding them.
Food is
another thing I learned from the secretary's office, actually, that if we were bringing people for tough conversations, we should give them food. So not that the new staff orientation is tough conversation, but it is still an opportunity to be in a different
Yeah.
mood and in a different place with each other if we're
Right.
breaking bread together and
Yeah.
getting to know each other. And so that's been a nice pleasure. And actually, the second session of this semester's new staff orientation is this afternoon. So I'll be
that's great.
going along to that, and that's our undergraduate education folks. So
Wow.
Pam Schurmeister and members of her team will be introducing their work on the academic side.
Oh, that's excellent. And I love that. Because, when I think back to my time coming on board to the college, it can be intimidating, right? Because it's this whole ecosystem, right? And you're learning all these new things about how Yale College functions and all of these different departments and what they do and how they contribute and all of these new people and how and what their roles are. And like you said, I mean, first of all, even just creating that space to do it, but also, I mean, as we laugh about it, but food, having food, it just changes the dynamic,
Definitely.
right?
The other thing we do is for the 4 sessions, we go to different parts of the physical campus.
Oh, that's
And so
great.
people are often in buildings that they might not be in if you're working in admissions. You might
Right.
not be in Warner House where the office of the dean is, or if you're working in financial aid, then you're in Church Street rather than in a residential college. And so even bringing people physically to different parts of the college is meant to be, here's an introduction to the whole landscape that you're involved in helping.
Oh, I love that. I'm so happy to hear that that's been implemented, because I don't think it's been, at least in my time, it hasn't been done before.
Yeah, I think there's been a university-wide orientation, but as you say, the college can be its own world, and we both concentrate in our own work, but have partners across the college, and so hopefully we weave together folks, maybe into even a cohort, if you're starting at the same time as someone from a different office, that you can kind of see yourself over time and have at least have a contact in that other part of the college so that you can understand it and reach out.
I would love that. I mean, I would even love to see that for not just new staff, but even, staff who have been here for a while. Yeah.
So maybe we'll, as I said, the first one, we had lots of people in it. This one is a bit smaller. I think it's about 12 people. Maybe if we're going to repeat this over the years, we could start inviting people with more experience and actually weaving their experiences into it as well. So not just, we're trying not to make it purely a presentation, although there's some
discussion.
There's some discussion, but although we are giving a lot of information, so sometimes the most efficient way of doing that is by someone presenting something clear.
Right.
But as we go on, we should definitely experiment, and if there's a desire for folks who've been here a bit longer to participate,
I'll volunteer.
that would be great.
Yeah, I would love to. I mean, because even for me, every day I'm still learning like little details about the different departments and what they do. I mean,
we're a complicated place. We're an interesting
really
place,
is.
but it is complicated.
Yeah, I mean, when you hear about various groups and all of the events they're running and all of these other things that they're doing for students, it's really amazing to see how everything kind of it comes together. And I volunteer. I would love to be involved. So yes, we're already coming up on our hour. So I'm wondering if you could tell us a little bit about maybe just future vision. I mean, we talked about this program, but how do you vision whether it's this program or other efforts? How they'll change in the coming years at Yale College.
Well, I think they will change, and they'll hopefully be responsive to the arising needs. We did have a year-long strategic planning process where we identified kind of initial areas where the college could coordinate to take forward the work, and identifying high enough level goals so that the different teams and offices could identify their own yearly and multi-year goals as part of that process. So I think I'm quite excited just to see after our first year where we are. One part of the strategic planning process was just the process.
Yes.
I think sometimes process is the product in some ways. So having those conversations, gathering slices of the community together, presenting themes, the dean presenting themes at multiple, all staff meetings and hearing feedback means that there is a certain conversation already happening. And so I think I'll be excited to see after the first full year of that existing, and it's it's available online for people to check out.
Right.
Where we've seen progress, where we've changed our mind, I think
Right.
that is also interesting. There might be things that we identified last year as being priorities, and the world may have
things
changed, or
yeah.
things may have happened in other places that mean that certain priorities slip down lower or have been superseded. And so I think that's the place that I'll look. So I think that was nice for me to begin in a new role, being able to be part of coordinating the planning process. It, very selfishly allowed me to have lots of great conversations with colleagues and learn from them and learn their vision for their own parts of the college, but also the college as a whole. So that will be the place that I look to
That's fantastic.
kind of analyze where we've come and where we need to go.
Awesome. So finally, my last question for you, Andrew, again, it's been so nice to just get to know you today, and I'm wondering if you have any kind of message that you'd like to share, either with students and staff, or both, or even just those who are aspiring to become leaders at the university or at the college. Like, do you have a final message for anyone who's just inspired by your journey and where to begin?
Where to begin?
Yeah.
I think be more thoughtful than I was at the beginning. But no, I think I've sometimes get asked to speak to graduate students who are potentially thinking of what used to be called like alt-ac careers, so alternative careers. It feels a slightly dated term, but I think the term gets used because it suggests that you might still stay within the kind of landscape of higher education, but not be doing teaching and research.
Got it.
And I ask the things I say to those people include, you have many skills, you've been trained in many ways, and currently you might think of those in a particular way, but you can take a step back and narrate those in broader terms and make those clear to other people. And I think that's true of everyone.
Right.
That we all have experience and skills that we can make known to others. So I suppose that's the first thing that I say. I'd certainly tell those people not to feel like trapped in their current situation, that it can sometimes seem that there are obvious next steps. And if those steps are not the ones that you want to pursue, or if circumstances don't allow you to do so, sometimes I think people can feel restrained and trapped. And so again, I try and just give a broader perspective of there are lots of opportunities. Your people I'm talking to are skilled and talented in all sorts of different ways and can make useful contributions across the board. So I think I suppose those two things are simply to say, we can tell a story of what we can contribute, and that there are opportunities to make those contributions, and that's a good thing to do for everyone. The other thing that I've again learned myself is just as much as possible, given all the other busy things in our days, being able to make time to have conversations with colleagues, the informational interview, if you want to call it that, can really open up directions for people. There can be, particularly if people are looking to make a move, but if you indicate to people that you have an interest, and even if you can't name what that is, sometimes having a colleague or an acquaintance see you mentioned earlier, my husband being able to create the connections where I had not seen the connections. I think both everyone from good friends to others who know us through our professional life can sometimes see those connections in ways that we are living them too closely to see. So that's maybe that's unfairly asking other people to do the work.
But it's true though,
it could
because be good. I've even found, and I've said this in previous episodes of the podcast, where I was and am more of an introvert, but I did find that things changed in my career once you have to kind of come out of your shell a bit, and you have to talk to people, and I've been pleasantly surprised just by literally just reaching out and saying, hey, would you like to have a cup of coffee and just chit chat for a little bit? And but things do take a turn when you start to talk to people. And
I
you
mean,
really
I think it
just
also
have
makes
to-
us human as well, to want to have that
exactly.
connection and have that coffee. And I try not to think in too instrumental terms about, I'm meeting someone just for further my professional career.
For my career,
but just because it's interesting to meet new people, and it's fun to have, whether it's coffee or lunch together, to have that human connection. And
exactly.
In a world where we're sometimes looking at our screens a lot or are very highly productive in regimented ways, it's great to break free of that sometimes and make new connections.
Yeah, and I think that's probably the best thing we could sort of end this episode on, is having that human connection, and not for any other purpose or agenda, but just to get to know each other and connecting. And I think at least for me, it makes working here more enjoyable, because I have that sort of I know more about you, and I, as a person, not so much like, oh, these are all of your accolades and all of these things, but now I just know more about you.
We spend a lot of time with each other. In work life, that it's great when we can have the richness and the detail, where we actually know more of someone and can and benefit from their range of experiences and their perspective, in a way that if we're more closed off or more narrowly focused, we sometimes don't get. So I appreciate that being here, and thank you for prompting me to think about things that I don't often think about.
I appreciate you accepting. And thank you so much, Andrew. So in closing, I just want to share a couple things. In closing, my conversation with you today is sort of illuminated the the transformative power of education, but just like we mentioned a second ago, the community engagement, interdisciplinary scholarship, like you mentioned earlier with your early years. Your journey sort of, it's a great example of how, your curiosity sort of fed into your path, and all of these different experiences you've had over the years, and also just your dedication to Yale, but also to other projects that foster inclusivity and belonging. So as we conclude this episode of Yale College Voices, I just want to remind our listeners, just like we said, to embrace curiosity, have conversations, and continue fostering collaboration and mentorship in all of our journeys, whether they're academic or professional. So Andrew, I just want to thank you again for taking the time to be with me today. And this was actually, again, I just love being able to get to know people and hear about just how you grew up. And I never had an opportunity to do that.
No, thank you.
And to me, it just makes a huge difference in terms of our working relationship, because again, just having that human connection, I think, is so important. So we're going to end for today. And, again, I just hope that our listeners will listen to this episode, and now you know a bit more about Andrew, and you'll invite him out for coffee. And
I'm waiting all the invitations to come in.
Yes. So again, thank you so much, Andrew, for today.
Thank you, Darice.
And thank you to all our listeners, and thank you for the support. So we'll end here.